Hello, and thank you so much for tuning in, and a big thank you to Valerie for being here. I'm really excited about this interview because we're going to be talking about a topic that is incredibly important to the quality of our products, but also full of all sorts of it depends and hidden details that make a really big difference. So, we're talking about our ingredients. My guest today is Valerie George, an award-winning beauty chemist, the co-host of the Beauty Brains podcast, and the founder of Simply Ingredients, a high-quality ingredient supplier in the US. So I am thrilled Valerie agreed to this interview because I learn so much every time we talk. I could pick her brain endlessly, but today I'm going to try my best to limit myself to questions about the ingredients that we use in our own skincare, specifically sourcing and identifying high-quality ingredients, storage, and shelf life. So Valerie, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Marie. I'm excited to be here. So I'm Valerie George, a cosmetic chemist with almost 15 years, actually over 15 years of experience in the beauty products industry. I worked for many years as a formulating chemist at a leading salon brand. And before that, I had experience at a small skincare brand. And I really love ingredients, chemistry, products. I could talk about it all day, every day. And in fact, that's actually what I do. So by day, I have a formulation lab called Simply Formulas, and we primarily work in hair care and hair color for large brands, multinationals, global entities, but also medium to small brands and startups focusing in that hair care and hair color space. But about 5 years ago, I founded Simply Ingredients, which is an online ingredient retailer that repacks really high quality ingredients down for the DIY formulator, people who have their own small brands themselves and like to make their own products. I started the company because when I was an executive at a leading salon brand, I also worked in the technology space, developing and identifying ingredient technologies for them. And I came across so many cool ingredients that I was like, wow, this is like the coolest ingredient ever, but it would just never be used in the salon space. But I kept all of them in a little Rolodex. And from time to time, I would get questions on social media where I'm at cosmetic_chemist on Instagram. And people would, ask about either cool ingredients or need troubleshooting help with their own products that they were making. And my husband, Mr. Cosmetic Chemist, said, why don't you sell the ingredients to these people? Because you're doing so much recommending to other ingredient suppliers, or like some of this stuff just can't be found. And I was like, you know what? I should. And so that's what I did.
So how does your background and experience as a chemist influence Simply Ingredients and the ingredients that Simply Ingredients carries?
Well, it would be really easy just to put a ton of stuff online, lots of things that kind of everyone else sells. The reality is, I think every ingredient has a story to tell, and every ingredient has an education opportunity. So for example, I am not anti-POM. However, I do believe if you're using POM-based materials, the POM shouldn't just come from an RSPO member. A lot of companies out there online in the reselling space advertise RSPO, but it should be mass balance. And so telling the story of like, well, why mass balance POM and what does that mean? And even furthermore, providing the mass balance certificate from the POM producer that we're using. We just like to be thought-provoking and make sure that with every ingredient we're helping people make better decisions for their brand, whatever the decision is. There's no right or wrong.
All right, yeah, I love that. So let's start by talking about ingredient quality. This is something I think we all broadly know matters. Using high quality ingredients is a good idea. When we're talking about, say, food, cooking, the impact of a higher quality tomato or cheese is really obvious in its flavor and its texture, but when you start making skincare, it can be a lot harder to identify like a high and a low quality cosmetic ingredient. And when it is like really, really important, just because like we don't have years of experience with these ingredients like we do with a tomato. And then also we're usually ordering online, so you don't have the ability to, like squeezy like you would at the grocery store, or sniff it and see if it, really smells like a strawberry. So can you chat a bit about ingredient quality?
Well, quality can vary a lot, even for ingredients with the same name. So for example, you see two milk thistle seed oils. Depending on how the milk thistle seed oil is produced, how the producer stores the seed, cares for the seeds, extract the seeds, filters the seeds, refines the seeds, all of that can influence the way an ingredient smells, feels, behaves in your formulation. It could change the impurities that are present in it. So there's a lot of nuances in ingredient sourcing, but it's my natural curiosity to say, why are these two milk thistle seed oils different? Because they feel different tactilely, right? It's also related to if it's an industrial chemical, is it really intended for the pharmaceutical industry? Food grade also plays a huge role. So for example, food grade xanthan gum is actually very different from personal care grade xanthan gum. And you can actually be introducing more bacteria into your product by picking up a bag of xanthan gum from the grocery store. So all those little things I take into consideration when I'm sourcing a raw material and making sure that I'm giving somebody like you who loves making products at home, making sure one, you either have that knowledge or I've taken care of some of those things for you. There are some ingredient categories where I would say quality does matter more than other ingredient categories. And so, for example, actives, and not just extracts. I don't even get me started on botanical extracts with standardized versus non-standardized. But for example, tetrahexadecyl ascorbate, which is oil-soluble vitamin C, you want to make sure that you're buying from the producer that has the highest quality material, highest purity of material, and therefore can substantiate the claims that are associated with that. Additionally, there are many state laws going on, and believe it or not, they apply to very tiny brands who are making their own products and selling them at farmers markets. And those would be laws related to ingredient impurities, for example, heavy metals, especially if you're using clays, which are naturally mined from the earth, so they do contain heavy metal content, or even natural extracts. A lot of people think, oh, because it's plant, it's safe. Believe it or not, a lot of plant-based material has natural heavy metal content, and that can be a contributing factor to the formulation. And that kind of stuff's really highly regulated.
Yeah, well, of course, where the plant was grown is going to have a big impact on what is in it. And if it, heaven forbid, somebody started plucking chamomile from Chernobyl, you wouldn't want to use that in your product.
No, that wouldn't be, your skin would look glowing, that's for sure.
And I can also remember seeing some FDA recalls for bentonite clay due to high lead levels, and seeing those recalls and then remembering some kind of online advice that I've seen recommending that you eat bentonite clay to help like detox your body. Ironically, one of the claims is usually that it will absorb heavy metal from your body, and that this clay then is like has a dangerously high level of lead, and that kind of scary.
Well, the clay did absorb the metals just in the ground before it got to you. So it's exactly like that. There are other materials that I think are really important as well that people write off as commodities, and those would be your carrier oil. So that could be a nut oil, it could be a seed oil, but it basically comes from a plant or a nut. And the way the material is produced impacts the quality, as I just mentioned a little bit earlier. And the quality can affect the smell, the tactile and sensory benefits or performance. And it also could impact the shelf life of the product. So I hate when people make these blanket statements about different plant oils or carrier oils where they say, oh, shelf life's 12 months. And it's like, well, who produced it, right? Because I have a producer that has a very proprietary extraction technique where they're able to remove oxidants from the formula to prevent further oxidation. And so you get a 5-year shelf life out of the oil. But if you don't have that process, the shelf life is actually very short. And shelf life is another term I hate. Maybe we can talk about that later because it doesn't mean anything unless you know the day the material was produced. It has nothing to do with when I sell it to you. But one example with carrier oils actually is solvent extraction versus cold pressing or expeller pressing, which would be another type of extraction technique. The first extraction method is always crushing or cold pressing. Then it might go through expeller pressing. Then once they feel like, okay, we've gotten everything out from physical grinding of this material, the producer will solvent extract it. It's always the last step in the line. So all the good stuff is kind of already gone. And you're essentially flushing the seed or kernel with a solvent like hexane or toluene. And you're trying to get all the other oily materials out. And then they evaporate that solvent off. So the solvent goes away, but it's always left as a little tiny impurity. And there's nothing wrong with these oils, but They don't typically contain the vitamin E and the other nutrients and goodies and free fatty acids that you would be looking for. It's literally kind of like the leftover stuff of the oil. So it's kind of like, the bottom feeding material of the oil. And so that's not a sign of a very high quality oil. And then of course there's food grade versus cosmetic grade, which is a whole nother animal. And the reason this is important is there's not necessarily a difference between the materials per se, like the oil is the oil, the inky is the inky. Again, there's very different standards in terms of microbial burden, shelf life, oxidation byproducts, etc., when it comes to using food grade oils versus cosmetic grade oils.
And with all of these things, the ingredient name would be the same. It could just be, like almond oil. The inky would be the same. You wouldn't be able to tell from reading an ingredient list what the supplier had, or like what the manufacturer had used to make the product. But it does make this really big difference to us behind the scenes.
It does. And usually though, with a higher quality material, honestly, it's a higher price. It just costs more to have higher quality product, and especially when you're looking at seed oils, for example. It takes so many fruit seeds to make even just 1 ounce of strawberry seed oil. And the shelf life is so short on fruit oils in general anyway, that the quality is really important, especially how long the strawberry seeds sat there before you were able to process them. The other types of material I would say that kind of seem a little bit like, oh, well, let me just get it from anywhere, are emulsifiers and surfactants. And the challenge is, again, when you have an inky name, you just see an inky name, and you cannot assume that they are equivalent across all suppliers, because all emulsifiers and surfactants have impurities in them. And it's not necessarily heavy metals or anything scary like that. But for example, surfactants are made through chemical synthesis. Every manufacturer has their own proprietary process for making surfactants. And so sometimes a cocamidopropyl betaine or a cocamidopropyl hydroxysultane will have glycerin in it, and sometimes it won't. And that actually plays a huge role in how thick your cleanser comes out. Glycerin actually makes cleansers thinner, right? So the other aspect is sodium chloride. Some producers have a bunch of sodium chloride, which helps thicken. Some don't have a lot. And so you just can't swap them out. And also they have different activity levels. So some are 30% active, meaning the rest is water and other stuff. Some are 50% active. So you want to do your diligence in a full composition breakdown of the material to make sure you are buying Fuji apples to Fuji apples, not even just apples to apples. You want to be very specific to the varietal.
Oh, that's fascinating. On the topic of surfactants, I've definitely run into some inconsistencies that surprised me, especially when I had just started working with surfactants. And also thinking about sodium lauryl sulfoacetate, SLSA. This is an ingredient that I have heard a lot of people, they buy from Amazon because they can get it there and it's cheap. They go to make a shampoo bar with it, and then the shampoo bar never gets hard. It just always stays like mushy and soft. And every time somebody comes to me with this question, it's sort of like, oh, but did you, like, where's your SLSA from? And then when they switch to Stepan's Lathanol LAL, that typically solves the problem every time. And it's like, they're inky identical, but they're clearly like not identical.
Well, there's so many different grades that you can get, and there's even like pre-solubilized versions in water. The Lathanol material, for example, is about 70% total active matter of the surfactant, but then believe it or not, it has about 18% sodium chloride in it, as well as about 18% sodium sulfate. And those help not only thicken your traditional liquid system that you're making, but they also help impact the way the bar sets up. And if you're just buying stuff that you don't have any insight into where it comes from, you definitely are going to have some challenges in getting reproducibility from time to time. You're not alone, Marie, believe it or not, in the cosmetics industry. I do a lot of troubleshooting with brands or manufacturing facilities even. And they'll have challenges with the formula. And I get the whole history. You have to be like a detective. And you come to find out that they're just kind of buying whatever has the best price from whoever they want. And it's like, no, here's the specification. You're going to get a lot more consistent quality and reproducibility and precision and accuracy using the same materials that were the formulation was designed to work with. You just can't swap stuff out.
Do you have any other kind of like fun stories, I guess, of like ways that using a lower quality or even just like a different quality of an ingredient can impact a formulation?
Shea butter.
Ooh, oh, great. This one is,
I know you do
this
a lot of
ingredient's such a diva.
yeah, you've done a lot of education, I know, in your platform about how to avoid shea butter granules. And the one trick that we've learned in the industry is you just use really qualified suppliers of shea butter because they process the shea butter. So first off, you would never want to use pure shea butter.
Like the
Okay.
raw shea butter that, might have some streaks of like gray kind of through the amber base or the yellowy base.
Exactly. First off, shea butter is a plant, and so it probably has heavy metals in it. And the most important thing that you can do as a formulator is use refined butters. It doesn't go through a chemical per se refinement. A lot of people think it becomes chemically processed and it's no longer shea butter, and you no longer get the valuable triterpenes, which are anti-inflammatory compounds. That's not true. Actually, they basically take the raw shea butter and they heat it up and melt it, and they fractionate out the stuff that causes a problem in the crystallization process. This is high quality shea butter manufacturers, by the way. This isn't
Not just
everybody.
any old tub of refined shea butter.
Right. Then the second thing they do is they actually combine it with citric acid and activated charcoal to remove the charcoal removes the coloring essentially in any malodors, and the citric acid removes any heavy metals from it, which is
Oh,
probably like the most important thing. Yes.
yeah.
But the way they cool it down and kind of refine out those different layers just through the distilling process of it actually gives you a very specific melting profile that helps you avoid those crystallization issues in the future. I'll tell you, it's kind of not a funny story, at least to my friend, it's not, but they work at a big manufacturing facility and they had this shea butter formula that this brand wanted to make. Probably you've made shea butter formula similar to it. And they formulated it with a specific shea butter supplier that we use. And they thought, beautiful, it's going to go to production. I don't have to worry. Everything's going to be great. Well, a couple months later, production calls them and said, your formula's messed up. There's crystals all over this shea butter. You need to fix it. It's your formula. And so they called me and said, I just need like some mental justification here. And the first thing I said was, let me guess, they switched out the shea butter for a cheaper option. And they said, yeah. And it's like formulation 101. You have to have a high quality shea butter to avoid all these crystallization issues in the future.
Oh, that's fascinating. Oh man, I have just made a whole to-do list of new experiments I want to do with some different shea butters. I find one of the biggest objections a lot of makers have when it comes to the suggestion of buying or using refined shea butter or refined butters of oils of really any kind is that they feel like the goodness of it has been removed, that it has removed all the like the vitamins that they're using the butter for, and so if they're using a refined butter, then kind of like what's the point? Could you talk to that a bit?
I actually did a lot of work on oils in my previous career at the salon brand I worked at. And even processed oils, meaning refined, I should say, still have a vitamin E content to them. They still have vitamin A content. They still have this intrinsic vitamin content. The biggest factor is actually not the refining, it's how the oil was produced. So solvent extracted oils have the lowest vitamin profile. So again, it goes back to the quality of the manufacturing process, not necessarily the refining process.
So hypothetically, a cold processed refined oil would contain more vitamins than a sort of unrefined solvent extracted oil.
Could be. And honestly, sometimes I don't think, again, it depends on the producer and the oil, but solvent extracted might not even need to be refined because, again, there's nothing really coming out. It's probably filtered at best.
Okay, interesting. Okay, so This has been fascinating. So if we're going to kind of create a quick list for ingredient categories that makers should really prioritize when they're looking at sourcing and spending, like allocating that effort and that budget, what would be kind of your top picks?
Great question. I would say there are a handful of ingredients I would spend my money carefully on. I also would do a ton of diligence about the source. And the first one would be emulsifiers and surfactants. For the reasons we talked about before, where people are kind of buying the surfactants from anywhere they can get it the cheapest and then trying to replicate what you're making, you just end up with inconsistent product and maybe a product that's not even stable. So for example, if you think you're buying an emulsifier that's this emulsifier and it's actually not because there's some differences, you may not even have a stable product. And so I probably would select wisely here and ensure I'm actually buying what I want to be buying. The second is preservation. And this is because a preservative could have the same inky listing, but the breakdown is different. So if Euxyl PE9010, it's roughly 90% phenoxyethanol, 10% ethyl hexylglycerin, and a very tiny percentage of tocopherol, which isn't disclosed on the inky, but it's part of the composition. So that's great. You can get other Euxyl PE9010 types that don't have that exact percentage breakdown. And if you just swapped them out and you didn't do the right preservative efficacy testing, you actually could end up with a micro problem on your hand. The other aspect is colorants. A lot of people like to buy colorants from anywhere. And believe it or not, in the United States, colorants are highly regulated. And I think the US actually regulates colorants the most strictly out of anyone in the world, probably along with Japan. But colorants contain heavy metals in them. And we've harped a little bit about all of the safety issues and state laws coming into effect with heavy metal content, specifically lead. And we want to make sure that you're buying colorants that are allowed to be used in the United States, that the supplier of them tells you where you can use them. You just can't put any color on your eyes or lips that you want to. They're very highly regulated for your safety. As far as another ingredient that I would spend carefully on are high quality oils, because again, the quality of the oil makes a huge difference in the sensory aspect. So if you fall in love with one of our oils, let's say, and then you go get it from a different reseller, you're probably not going to be happy. The profile is going to be changed. I would also say there's some ingredients I'm not too concerned about. Now, of course, that doesn't mean you just go purchase them willy-nilly wherever you want to. You should still do your diligence on the grade, the sourcing, the certifications, the contamination risks. But fatty alcohols like cetyl alcohol, cetyl alcohol, maybe even panthenol, because panthenol is actually usually FCC grade or USP grade. And so if it says USP, it has a strict standard anyway, and you can kind of get it from whoever you want, but it needs to say that. So you at least need to still do some homework. Glycerin as well. Usually people are selling 99.7% active glycerin. That's the gold standard. It should also be USP.
Okay, so let's say somebody wants to go out and buy a high quality nut oil. High quality anything, but we'll do high quality nut oil for this example. How do you know what you're buying is high quality? Because yeah, it's not a farmer's market. You can't go and shake the farmer's hand and like squeeze it, sniff it, try it before you buy it. We are usually just clicking add to cart somewhere on the internet.
Great question. So I would say ultimately at the end of the day, you have to get it in your hands. And so I would recommend, this is actually any ingredient, buy a small quantity before you commit to a ton of it. But there are some things you can do before you click add to cart and spend your money that probably will help you in the long run. So the first is, and this is really for any oil, is you can look at the peroxide value of the oil. So the peroxide value is a chemical indicator that tells you how oxidized the oil is. And we disclose this on all of our certificates of analyses. And we actually do testing every 6 months on our inventory to ensure that the peroxide value hasn't increased, to make sure that the oil hasn't gotten more rancid out of specification, because usually the peroxide value is measured at the time it's produced. Every oil has a different range for allowed peroxide value. Nut oils are pretty low, and you can get Some nut oils have great shelf life out of them. For example, marula, macadamia, even sunflower, which is not I guess it's a seed oil, not a nut oil, would also have a great shelf life, but an argan oil historically has a terrible shelf life. Also, who you're getting it from is key. So I don't want to say I'm an oil expert. I didn't, study lipids in grad school, although I would have if, I did go back. I think it's so fascinating, but just ensuring you're buying from great suppliers and people who know what they're talking about. And those are people, honestly, who've probably worked in the industry. I don't mean to discredit a lot of people out there, but it helps to have some chemical knowledge of the materials as well as real life experience. I think that's really important as well. And so if you don't know who is selling it to you on Amazon, on Etsy, on eBay, unless they have an off eBay, Amazon, Etsy presence as like a real e-commerce store with all the information you need, I would probably say just pass. You also want to look for that documentation. So every oil should have a certificate of analysis with it. And that certificate of analysis, and by the way, you should be able to access this before you buy it. You should be able to know the date the oil was produced and know the recommended shelf life. Additionally, I do want to say that shelf life is also a guideline. So you might have 12 months listed on an oil, but it could go to 15. And usually the test is like a sniff test. If you're a layperson, if it smells, like it changed in scent or character, it, probably wouldn't use it, and you'll know that. And the more detail that someone can give you about the oil, the better.
Yeah, on the topic of like buying on, say, Amazon and documentation, one of the biggest downfalls of trying to buy something on Amazon is there's typically absolutely no documentation, or if there is, it can honestly also be wrong. I have seen Amazon suppliers selling synthetic preservatives like Liquid Germall Plus as natural, which is obviously a big red flag because that's just completely untrue. But if you were a brand new maker and you just wanted a natural preservative and you hopped on Amazon and searched for that, this would pop up and you might not know because it says it's natural, and there's just so much to learn. And that's, oh man, yeah. Whenever somebody sends me a link like that, I definitely get a little nervous flutters and kind of say, well, maybe, don't give them your money because they don't know what they're talking about. If they're wrong about this, what else are they wrong about?
And that's the scary part. And so I think using multiple trusted resources, and the keyword is trusted, looking at their credentials. For example, if they're interested in an ingredient, going back to your website, which is such a great resource. I even know formulators in the industry who use it. They do, because you have great SEO and it comes up, and, it's great to see what you write. You have to do your homework and do your diligence and ask people who do know before you make the leap into a new technology. Another huge red flag, aside from, the retailing space, is the pricing. I just really believe that you get what you pay for. There really is a huge difference. And so from that respect, look for suppliers that offer traceability, testing, transparency, and then are willing to answer the questions that you have and help steer you in the right direction.
Yeah, could you talk a bit more about documentation? So what are we looking for? What's important? What are the pieces of information we're really looking to be able to get our hands on?
Well, I put a lot of information on my website because I believe that you should know how to handle the material safely, and you should know about the specific lot of material that you're getting. So a safety data sheet, I would say, is the first and foremost document that you should get with a raw material. A safety data sheet tells you how to store it, how it should be transported, and how to handle yourself should it be spilled, should it get in skin contact. It should have a specific number to call. So for example, we have our own, basically chemical service that manages our safety data sheets for us. So if something happened to you, you could call them and they know our material, right? So they can help you through whatever situation you're in. The second document is a certificate of analysis, and this is unique to every lot number of material that's produced. Every certificate of analysis has different information on it, but it essentially should have the name of the material, the day it was produced, or month, the time frame in which it was produced, and the retest or use by date. As I mentioned before, not all ingredients magically expire. the date that's listed on the C of A. So they often get retested. And so we've switched our language to retesting so that people aren't unnecessarily throwing out ingredients that are actually still good. For example, beeswax, clays, even cetyl alcohol, they're literally good forever, but you kind of have to put a little bit of a date on there for them. It also tells you some of the physical and chemical properties of the chemical specific to that lot number. So color, odor, appearance could be some of them. The microbial load. So for example, if the materials are surfactant, it contains water, it should have undergone microbial testing to ensure that the product ingredient isn't contaminated when you're receiving it. It could have heavy metal quantities on there. Not all materials get tested for heavy metals, especially if their presence is not expected. But if the presence is expected, it should get tested, and that should also be on a certificate of analysis. So it really just tells you, specific to the lot number you're buying, what's the variation I can expect to see on an ingredient. Now, there's other regulatory documents per se that I think you should get access to. We actually don't necessarily provide those as PDFs, but we provide the information on our website. So geographical origin, which now is important. We've always reported it just so people know, kind of where it's coming from and how many miles it's traveled. We always provide a detailed composition breakdown. It's ISO 16128 score, which is a natural origin or natural content score, so you can calculate how naturally derived your product is. All types of physical and chemical properties we provide, but we provide a lot of stuff.
So another challenge that homemakers often face when buying ingredients is that the names can differ so much. So we've already talked about something like shea butter or almond oil, how it's just going to be called shea butter, even though there can be a lot of differences between a shea butter and a shea butter. But then we also have the challenge of more processed ingredients that are blends of multiple ingredients, like the Yuxel PE9010 you mentioned earlier, emulsifiers and preservatives. And so these usually get assigned like that shorter, easier to remember name, like the Yuxel PE9010. So rather than just, the big, long, inky. And then these shorter names can vary from supplier to supplier. One that comes to mind right away is GeoGuard ECT. And so from one company, it will be called GeoGuard ECT, which is the name from the manufacturer. But then another place calls something with exactly the same inky preservative Eco, and then another one will call it NatraGuard. And they all have the same inky, but I guess, where do these shorter names come from? And how are you supposed to know? Are these all GeoGuard ECT? Are they just inky identical? How are we supposed to tell?
Well, the short, easy names do come from the manufacturer of the ingredient. And so much like you might, if you have your own product brand, you'll come up with a cute name for your product, like lotion to cream powder or whatnot. These ingredient manufacturers also want easier to remember names, because sometimes the names can get really complex. And so it's just easier to remember a street name for something. But the industry calls them trade names. So it's whatever the manufacturer is trading that ingredient blend or that ingredient under. And the reason they have their own names is because every company wants to market under that material. So for example, GeoGuard ECT, they probably actually were the inventor of that material. GeoGuard ECT is now by Arxada, but it used to be Lonza. Before that, it was a different company, but basically their job is to make preservatives. And they often patent those preservative blends and the processes used to make them. So they're not going to go to market with the full inky name. That's boring. They're going to go to market with a really cool name like GeoGuard ECT, right? Once their patent expires or other companies get access to that technology, those other companies can't use the name GeoGuard ECT because that's not their company's name for it. That name might be trademarked, like the GeoGuard franchise is a trademark of the manufacturer that makes those products. So they'll come up with their own street name or trade name for this blend. And so even though they look like the same inky we already talked about, they could be very different. Sometimes they actually they're just marketed under different names. So you have to do your diligence to make sure that in the case of Yuxel PE9010, they're the original phenoxyethanol ethyl hexyl glycerin producers. That producer had a patent, the patent ended or expired. And so other companies start making a blend and calling it the same thing. But then you get people who want to make little variations and put their own little twists on it and say, well, we couldn't do 90-10 because that was in the patent, but we came out with 82-18. And so again, that goes back to ultimately you want to look at the INCI name. The trade name is helpful, especially if you want to know, is this Euxel PE9010? And I'll tell you, yes, this is Euxel PE9010. I don't mean metaphorically, I mean like it literally is, right? But you also just want to double check the composition and the CAS numbers on the chemicals to make sure so that you don't end up with performance differences due to confusion over street names.
Okay, well, let's say that you have managed to make some decisions and place an order and your ingredients show up at your house. What do you recommend you do with them once they arrive?
The first thing I recommend you do is to familiarize yourself with the ingredients. So what is it supposed to look like, smell like, the color? Again, not every supplier is the exact same. Some ingredients may be more yellow from one supplier or another. It's not necessarily a good or bad thing. It's just different, right? We have a watermelon seed oil that I don't think people are used to smelling what cold pressed watermelon seed oil smells like. It smells sweet, but also fatty. And so people just assume the oil is rancid, but I think they're used to getting maybe solvent extracted oils or adulterated oils or whatnot. So every supplier is different, and you should just familiarize yourself with smell, color, look, feel. Of course, also familiarize yourself with the storage conditions for the oil, or products. So some ingredients can be stored on a shelf, but if you have coconut oil, for example, and you live in Florida, probably not a great idea to store it on a shelf, right? It should be in a cool, dark place where it can remain solidified. But every ingredient should come with storage information either on the website or on the safety data sheet if it's not supplied on the website. It should also, just in my personal opinion, it has to have a lot number. There has to be traceability to what material you bought. And so we actually write lot numbers on our products. We do ingredient buys from competitors all the time, and I'm actually surprised some of them don't have lot numbers. But then also, we're one of the only people that actually puts a date on it of when it should be retested. And that was a hard decision for us to make, but ultimately, in the vein of transparency, you buy a ton of stuff, you're going to have to remember when you bought it and then go back and be like, oh, when did I buy it? Wait, did I get a certificate of analysis? When did this thing expire? I don't know. It looks good. Should I still use it, right? So we take the headache out for you, and we put a retest by date, which tells you if it's May 2025, take a look at the ingredient and see if it's good. And sometimes we actually retest ingredients. So you can contact us and see if the shelf life was extended on it. We always issue a new certificate of analysis. But let's say you bought an ingredient and it didn't have a date on it. Before you forget, you should absolutely check with the supplier when it was manufactured. Not hey, what's the shelf life? When was it manufactured? And then actually calculate a date. You want to come back to it and check that it's still good. And also, the more you're familiar with the ingredient, and you have maybe a little picture of it the day it came in, you could even do that if you don't have a great memory, you can see if it changed over time when you go to reevaluate it. Let's say you bought a ton in bulk. You might want to consider repacking it down into smaller containers just to avoid oxygen exposure. The more you cap and uncap something, the more you're introducing fresh oxygen into the container. And so it has a propensity to become rancid more faster. So that's kind of my quick tips on what I would do if I got an ingredient. So safety data sheet, looking at the shelf life of the product, specifically the manufacture date for the retest date, familiarizing yourself with it, and then packing it down once you decide, wow, I bought a really big container. I'm not going to use this much.
Yeah, maybe putting some of those smaller bottles in your fridge or freezer if you have space for them there to
if it can be stored in those conditions.
Yeah. Something that I've started doing recently too is just using a Sharpie to write on something like the day that I've opened it, so I can have a little bit of like stock, like first in, first out. Because sometimes I will end up with multiple bottles of the same thing. I will forget I have something and buy another one, and then like, which one of these is the newest?
I totally get it.
So one of the types of ingredients I've started being really diligent about writing those like day I opened it times on is preservatives, and especially the natural ones, because some of the natural ones have really quite short stated shelf lives. And that, that makes me nervous that your preservative needs to work. That's super, super important. And so if you're looking at a preservative and you've just got it in the mail and you look at the documentation from the manufacturer and it says that it's good for like a year after manufacture, and then you kind of trace it back and you figure, oh shoot, like I only have 6 months left on this preservative that just showed up at my house, or 9 months or whatever. Yeah, like how worried do we need to be about sort of like an expired preservative? And like I think one of like the larger questions there for a homemaker is, if you use a preservative that is, say, only 2 months away from its expiry date, does that mean the product that you make with it is going to spoil faster than if the preservative had only been made like 2 days before you used it?
Yeah, so I absolutely would be worried if a preservative were expired or close to expiry, because at the end of the day, that means its efficacy is waned. It's one ingredient I wouldn't mess with. It's like using expired aspirin, right? You could take it, you're probably going to be fine. But are you getting the entire strength that you've intended when you're taking it? And the answer is we don't really know. Kind of the good news about natural preservatives is you can tell when they're waning because they usually have a color shift. So you can tell that way, or they have some kind of appearance shift usually. But the first thing I would do is ask the person you bought it from if they could retest the material. And so this means, for me, I would go back to the actual producer of it and I would say, can you retest the material and extend the shelf life for me? That's not something I would extend just on my own. And I would see what they say, and they may say, no, it can't be extended. And so then I would go to you, the customer, and say, no, it's definitely a hard out, after you've bought it. And this is the important distinction between retest and use by. So use by means use by. I wouldn't use it after that. Retest means if it looks good, feels good, smells good, and we've extended the shelf life on our end through chemical testing, you can keep going with it. But on the preservative side, I wouldn't mess with it because the risks are so high from having a preservative that didn't pass or failed, and you have microbial growth. You could really injure the consumer. And there's just a lot of loss surrounding, adequate safety for the consumer from a microbial perspective. So I probably would pass. But there are a couple things you can do to prevent this. Now, if you bought stuff and you totally forgot about it and it was sitting in your cabinet, which we're all guilty of that. At one point in time, we were like, this ingredient's so cool. And then you buy it. And then you're like, wait, why did I want this? 2 years later. If you're just tinkering around, you should be okay. But if you're making a commercial, sellable product, I definitely wouldn't do it. The other thing is make sure you buy in small sizes, stuff that you can actually use, especially because preservatives aren't ubiquitous. You're not throwing it in everything. You're probably using different preservation systems. So always get the smaller package so you feel less guilty about having to discard 1 ounce of preservative versus like 15 ounces. But again, if you're just playing around for yourself, should be good. I wouldn't expect a super extended shelf life out of it. Like, it'd be something I'd consume very quickly if I put it in a product.
It makes a lot of sense. Thanks. It's, that's definitely a question that has been hard to get a good answer for. And it turns out it's because it's just a really, really squishy, it depends answer, like all the best answers. We love the complexity. We love it. We love it. We love it.
Yeah, I think it's fun.
All right. Thank you. I could keep picking your brain forever. But yeah, thank you so much. So if people want to learn more from you, follow what you're doing, where can they find you?
So I'm on Instagram at cosmetic_chemist if you just personally want to connect with me and see what life is like as a cosmetic chemist. But on the ingredient side and formulation side, if you're curious, you can find me on my website, simply-ingredients.com. We also have an Instagram account, Simply Ingredients. And we're really happy to just provide some support to help make you successful with our ingredients. That's really honestly what it's about, because you could buy stuff all day, but if you can't use it, what fun is that? So we look forward to hearing from everyone.
So I'm going to link all that in the description box below. If you guys haven't checked out simply-ingredients.com before, definitely do. Valerie does a really wonderful job of providing starter formulations for the ingredients that she sells, so you have something to do with them. And these starter formulations are they're accessible. They don't sort of have like 18 other ingredients you probably don't have in them, which is so nice. And she also provides the type of education that you can only get from somebody who's used the ingredient. So she'll have all these little tidbits that I will research an ingredient all day, and she'll have this little tidbit on her website that is the absolute essential thing that you need to make the ingredient work, kind of just really spelled out, and be like, oh, I'd heard this like whispered about elsewhere, but here Valerie's been like, this, gotta do this or it won't work. And I was like, thank you.
And that's we're starting to add my pro tips to there. I can tell when other companies lift off our website, because it's like there's no way you would have known that, because I figured that out at my previous job I worked at.
I learned that the
And your
hard way.
our lawyer will be contacting you. But anyway, no, like I said, we just want people to be successful. And, you know, especially if you're not like a real master at what you're doing, it can be really daunting working with a new material.
I appreciate it so much. So as a thank you to everybody for tuning in here, Valerie and I have a couple surprises for you. So we've put together a cheat sheet. I mean, I basically just did the graphic design here to help you make sure you're buying high quality ingredients. It's kind of like a checklist of things to pay attention to as you're shopping. And then Valerie has very generously created a coupon code for Simply Ingredients that is valid for the next 2 weeks. So if you want to grab those, check out the links in the description box below. Yeah, thank you so much, Valerie. This has been an absolute pleasure. Thanks to everybody for tuning in. And yeah, see you later. Bye.
Thanks for having me, Marie, and thanks for listening, everyone. Bye.